Good morning. I'm Francesco. I'm one of the engineering leads for Firebase, and I'm here today with our product manager, Safa, to introduce a new service in the Firebase family. By now, I think you know what Firebase is. It's this cross-platform mobile backend suite of services that helps you develop an app, grow your user base, engage your users, and earn money. And Firebase Remote Config allows you to instrument your application so you can run A/B testing of your features. So why config? It's a story that starts many years ago when I joined a small team that has this big, ambitious goal in mind to build an open mobile operating system. Back then, we wanted something that would allow us to configure a few things for different OEMs and carriers. For example, our old system, cloud-to-device messaging, used config to determine the period of a heartbeat to connect to networks based on carriers on different locations in the world. And this service proved to be really useful, so much that it grew really, really big. And when other parts of the company figured out that this service existed, a lot of colleagues of mine that were building applications at Google started using the system. And at some point, I think all major Google apps used this service. But the usage wasn't really perfect because as we built the service for the platform, we didn't have compartments, so there was cross-pollination of the configuration files for applications. Each app could read and write other applications files. So when we built Firebase, we grouped together to build these services. We decided it was the right time to make this service right for applications and also for third parties so you could use it. And we had to do two things. First, we had to make sure that config files were for apps, so different apps could not read each other's. But mainly, we had to make it scale. 8 years ago, we didn't predict the success of Android. And billions of devices made us like, we had to re-architect the system to make it scale at the size. And also, all these applications on top, we didn't foresee they would use the service. They pose quite a complexity. And also, because Firebase is cross-platform, we added iOS devices and many more applications on top. But we made it, so today we have Firebase Remote Config, which is a web console where you can type values for your variables that you use to instrument your app. So you can turn on and off features in your application, and you can make your code behave differently. And you can target devices, group of devices, based on language, carrier, operating system type, or application version, and more. And you can have multiple of these in parallel. And for each group, you can also select a small % of them to get the initial configuration files, so you can do stage rollouts. Stage rollouts are important because if you uncover a bug, you contain the population that is looking at the bug. And if you want to test something, you get early feedback from your users, like if you have a button that says buy, but you want to try a different thing like get, then you can get early feedback from your users. And even further, we connected with Firebase Analytics, so now your A/B testing becomes really powerful because you can have a feedback loop of what works, and you can target the population based on your analytics data. And you can do all this without repackaging APKs. Your users don't have to download an update version of your app. It just on the fly works, just changing values from the web console. To get Firebase config is really simple. You pull in the Firebase SDK, and this is an Objective-C example for iOS. You initialize config, and you download the values when the application opens. And then throughout the code, you can use those variables to unlock new features. And the same goes for Android. This is the 2 slides before into one. On the top part, you have the initialization, and then you play with the variables. Well, let's see in details how this product works and how we can control rocket launches. So please welcome Safa, our product manager.
Thank you. So I'm here today to do 3 things. I'm going to introduce a new term, wiring up your app. I'm going to argue that it pays to always wire up your app before you launch. And I'm going to show you how remote config is a good solution for this. To do this, we're going to have a little bit of fun. Let me introduce you to Rockets Express, a pizza delivery service, an interplanetary pizza delivery service in the solar system. And of course, this service has an app. And we've packed a whole bunch of gizmos and features in this app. Many of them have never been seen or tried before. Do I hear you groan already, thinking, oh my God, these are all going to crash? So our whole priority has been to get this thing launched. So, there's the pressure. You've probably experienced this yourselves. We're aiming to get to I/O after all. And I mean Jupiter's I/O, the moon. And our whole goal is to get this puppy out there so we can catch the launch window. OK, our launch goes pretty well. We shoot right past the moon. We approach Mars. And our plan is to actually go right past Mars because we're going to, in a rush to get to I/O. But something interesting happens now. When we get to Mars, we spot a bunch of Martians, and they're having a pizza emergency over there. And we realize that they could use our app to get their pizza. So our CEO, that's you, turns up to our engineer and says, hey, Toria, we need to get a message out to people to show them how to order pizza with our app. Unfortunately, Toria replies saying, sorry, sir, we were in such a rush to launch that we didn't wire up our app in advance. So you ask, what do we have to do? OK, Toria says, we should have used Firebase Remote Config. And so the CEO asks, well, how much is it going to cost us and how long is it going to take? And Toria replies, it's absolutely free. And it should be pretty fast. So we have to go back to the hangar and wire up. So the first question is, what does Toria mean by wiring up your app? You can think of your app as this complicated spaceship. It has a lot of systems, a lot of people working on it. And of course, you can always run down to engineering every time you need a change or a correction, etc. But really what you want to have is a control center. It's a mission control center, like you see here in Houston. And that way, you can make changes without relaunching your app every time. We like to think of this mission control center as the remote config console. And here's the first screen of a remote config console before you've entered any mission control parameters. And here's a few mission control parameters in your remote config console, except we actually call these config parameters. And as you can see, they simply consist of key value pairs. OK, so just a few lines of code. And you see over here, the key is special message, and you just get the value. Not hard at all to program this. And here we are, special message. We're back in the console, and we're putting into special message what we're going to say to our Martian friends. OK, we refitted our app. We came back. We now have a special message. And it was important that we put this in behind a config parameter, because maybe by the time we've relaunched and come all the way back, things have changed, and we actually have to say something a little different. So this worked out for us. And we left a bunch of happy Martian app users now and grew our user base. OK, on to the next stage of the journey, which is the asteroid belt. And here, the danger is negative comments from crashes. And our goal is to get through the asteroid belt while minimizing the negative comments. Clearly, crashes and failures can be pretty bad for your app. Here's some negative comments. First two are pretty self-explanatory. The last one really gets me. The user likes your app. It's a good app. They are loyal. They want to stay with you. And they're working really hard to get over tech problems. That's really sad. What a shame. OK, so after some careful analysis using Firebase Crash, you figure out that there's one feature that's bringing down your whole app. And you desperately call Toria saying, oh no, and thinking, actually, not saying, thinking, oh no, do we have to go back? Do we have to go refit our app? We have to do everything again? Fortunately, Toria has been smart. What she did, what she realized when she refitted the rocket ship was that she could actually go the whole way and put everything behind a config parameter. So what she did is she put every feature behind a config parameter. You can think of these as feature flags. So basically, here's one of the things that helps you do this is this defaults file that we have. It allows you to program lots and lots of features without actually having to put them all on the console. So then, only when you're on the console only when you need to change it, do you change something on the console. Here's a local default file for iOS. And here's the same thing for Android. Again, completely cross-platform. Everything works on iOS and Android. And you fetch the local default files, surprise, with exactly the same lines of code. There's no difference. All that happens is when you fetch it, the override value from the console overrides your local default. And we've done a lot of work to make remote config very efficient. So when you want to get stuff from the server, for example, you use a fetch call. The fetch call checks your local cache, checks your cached values, and there's a time to live, and sees if the time to live has expired, and only when it's expired does it actually go and fetch stuff. So that relieves you of worrying about how fresh is your stuff. What you do is you call fetch anywhere you wish, and config takes care of the rest. Similar things apply to the rest of the API. OK, so now to turn off a feature, all you do is you go back to your console, and its default value was true, but now you just turn it to false, and that turns off the feature. So thanks to Toria's foresight, we managed to navigate our way through the asteroid belt while minimizing the negative comments. OK, now we finally approach our destination, which is I/O. A few interesting facts about I/O. I think you've guessed by now I like space. It's the 5th moon of Jupiter. It's similar in size to our moon, and it's got an iron core. But most importantly of all, it looks like pizza. I could swear those are olives and there's a pepperoni on it. And trust me, you go search on the internet and people will say it looks like pizza. So then we have a real problem. Now that we're getting to I/O, we realize that in a moon that looks like pizza, people must know a lot about pizza. So are they going to be OK with our basic pizza, which is what we thought we were going to give them? Or do we need to experiment with something else, like a thick crust pizza? So that's really essential. So you, the CEO, this time timidly, goes down to Toria and asks, any chance we can experiment with thick crust pizza? And to your surprise, Toria says, absolutely. How come? Well, when you wired up your app, you automatically get use of configs conditions. Now what you can do is you can apply rules to select a subgroup of your users. So here I am showing on the config console some of the rules you can use for creating a condition. And here it is. I've applied a specific condition, experiment 1, variant A, to special message. As you can see, with its default value, it's basic pizza, but its experimental value is special thick crust pizza. OK, let's look at a little bit more closely at 2 of these rules, specifically user in random percentile and user in audience. So you've probably gone to a few Firebase presentations by now, and you know that Firebase Analytics has a thing called audiences. Here on this screen, you can see I'm creating an audience based on app version. And what this does is that it segments the user groups to something smaller so you can target them. And clearly, I'm calling this I/O visitors. And these audiences are available to Firebase as a whole, because it's a well-integrated system. So here I am. You can see that in conditions for remote config, I have a drop-down that shows you all the audiences that are available for my app. And here I'm choosing I/O visitors, which we just created. But I'd like to also draw your attention to that little button on the right called AND, with an AND. And yes, you guessed it, it enables me to add another rule. Over here, I'm adding user in percentile at 10%. So what this means is that I took my audience of I/O visitors, and I'm targeting 10% of that audience. Now, the same thing, it's the same exact thing, no difference, applies to special message. Okay, so the next thing is we need to actually track this in Firebase Analytics. Well, how do we do this? Here's a little tip, one of the things we can do. You can use user properties in Firebase Analytics. Here I'm setting up experiment 1. And you set up experiment 1 in remote config to reflect the value of, to reflect which experiment is happening. So here I have experiment 1 that shows you either if the default value fired or the experiment 1 variant A fired. Then a couple of lines of code. You get the value of experiment 1 out of config, and you put them into the user property. What this does is now every event that goes to Firebase Analytics is now tagged with the value of experiment 1, which you can then use in the analysis by filtering for the value of experiment 1 to see, for example, if it's variant A. Okay, so what's the vote? Is it going to be basic pizza or is it thick crust pizza? I think the users there were very sophisticated and they liked thick crust pizza. So now we want thick crust pizza to apply to everyone. So we go back to remote config, we get rid of the condition, and we make the default value thick crust pizza, and now everybody gets thick crust pizza. So we did our experiment, we got our results, and we set our default. And as you can see, they're pretty happy with their thick crust pizza. Okay, so now for some real spaceships out there exploring the universe. Here's Fabulous. It's an app that is incubated at Duke University's Center for Advanced Hindsight. And its purpose is to help you get rid of bad habits and replace it with healthy rituals. Actually, I'm using it myself to improve my own sleeping habit. You can think of Fabulous as the ultimate A/B testing platform. Why? Because you're trying to change user habits. And user habits are very difficult to change. So you have to be able to experiment like crazy to be able to figure out what works for these people. And the Fabulous team has wired up their whole app with config parameters that they filled in with JSON objects. Here's an example of one of their A/B testing. It's specifically interesting because they've combined notifications, Firebase notifications, with config. And as you can see at the top there, there's a notification showing a little rocket, very relevant to us, and a prompt. When you click on that, their default action is to take you to this screen that asks you to set up a full screen alarm for some activity. And you can, you can choose that and get started. Interestingly enough, you can now use Firebase, they can use Firebase Remote Config to experiment with the percentage of their population, what happens when they click on a notification. In this case, when you click on that notification, it actually comes up with something completely different. It comes up with a picture of a parched tree asking you a question. And if you answer the question like as, it's asking you what does a tree need? And if you answer yes, it needs some water, it comes back and tells you a little bit about their research. And hopefully, that will have a different effect on you and cause you to choose drink water as a good habit to try out. Here's another app, Yumly. They are for choosing recipes. Now, I have a personal connection with this, which is I often have to cook meals for my daughter, and I have to admit, cooking is not my strong suite, all the free food at Google. And I actually struggle often to come up with a good recipe that she actually likes. Well, Yumly really helps me out with this, with their dietary preferences and their shopping list and everything that goes with it to help me find a good meal. So they wanted to experiment with their Connect screen. And it's the first screen that their users see. And what they wanted to do is to find out how can they improve their login, how they can improve their conversion to login. Here's a bunch of parameters and a bunch of conditions that they've set up to test just that. One of these tests was interesting to me, and I'm showing it to you over here. On the left with A, you can see that they have a generic screen. And on the right, they have a contextualized screen based on the user's search or based on some other parameter. And so it would stand to reason that a contextual screen would have a better impact on login, right? Well, wrong. It's not. It doesn't do that. They actually ran this experiment, and they found out that their generic screen was much more effective. In fact, with search, their generic screen was twice as effective. And with their recipes, the generic screen was 20% more effective. So they went back and actually got everything back to generic. And it really goes to confirm how important it is to be able to experiment with stuff before you actually go in with assumptions. OK, a few words on conclusion now. Many of us, when we're creating apps, not only do we want to run a great business, but we would really like to go and have an impact on the world and change how people do things. Perhaps go further and change how people think, and perhaps go even further and change what is possible. So to do this, we have to have a close conversation with our users. With apps, you really have the potential to talk to millions of people, affecting how they think and how they live. With the very greatest apps and the greatest conversations, you can profoundly shape our culture. To succeed in this conversation, you need to instrument your app so that you can listen to see what users are up to. And we know that Firebase Analytics provides you a free and easy solution to do so. But listening is only half of this conversation. The other half is to be able to respond fast to what users throw your way. And responding fast is essential because that way users can stay engaged and they can understand that you're being responsive and making changes that make sense for them. So we've built Firebase Remote Config to make it easy to do just this: respond fast. It's got a simple API. It's got a straightforward console. It scales massively. And it's integrated with analytics. What remains for you to do is to wire up your app before you launch, so you can always complete your conversation with your users. Here's what you can do next. The documentation is at firebase.google.com/docs/remote-config. If you forget that, just go to firebase.google.com and search for remote config. I'm sure it will turn up. You can also look at our support and at our YouTube and Twitter feeds. On behalf of Francisco and myself, thank you very much for coming today. And we really look forward to seeing what you do with Firebase Remote Config so that we can actually make it better.